Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Jim Drew, and I was first exposed to Commodore in 1977. Since then, I've been everything from an entry-level user to a shareholder in Commodore, and everything in between, of course. But the majority of my working life involved with either working on Commodore products or working on something that was a result of my experience working on a Commodore product. So basically, Commodore has been in my entire life, whether I like it or not. And so I'm going to share today basically a history of my life, of what I have done throughout my entire time. And so I know you've even heard stories about Bill Hurd and Dave Haney and these people working with Commodore back in the day, sleeping on the floor of the offices and all this stuff. And I can tell you for sure the struggle is real. These things happen. And so I would have never guessed that I would have been here today because of a home computer. So it's interesting how things can turn. In fact, I was talking with the Atari guys, and you'll see my history of Commodore. And if my dad had brought home an Atari, I might have been in the opposite camp. You know, who knows with how things happen. So I'm going to call this presentation Full Circle with me. And it's basically, I'm going to have a full circle moment with you guys today. So 1974. My father was a museum curator and director. He went to the museum and it was in shambles. In fact, when he arrived, there were photographs in a trash barrel, and he pulled them out and looked at them, and he was an art major in college, and they were original Rembrandt prints, and they were in the trash can. And so my dad pulled them out, and we went to San Francisco and had them appraised, and they are legitimate Rembrandt prints. And so my dad decided at that point, because the museum was in shambles, that he was going to try to find a way to organize the museum. So this is the museum. It's in Klamath County. It's Klamath Falls, Oregon, where I was born and raised. And my dad started getting Commodore filing cabinets for the museum. And this is what his goal was, is to get these big heavy-duty cabinets. And you can see we've got all kinds of different cabinets that he obtained for the museum, Commodore logos on everything, and including desks. So office desks were done with Commodore, so which is pretty cool. So my dad had a connection with Commodore for a long time because of that. And here's another desk picture. So 1977 rolls around, and my dad was a super duper techie guy, right? And he thought, oh, we got to have some kind of a high-tech thing for the museum. So we're going to go, and I'm going to talk to my guys at Commodore, and we can see if we can get this new computer, this newfangled computer they're working on. So at the end of CES, my dad ended up getting a PET 2001 for the museum. And so it's one of the first 100 units, apparently. And I have been trying to get this computer for the museum for the last, probably 6 or 7 years or something like that. And they decided to give it to me. So that's cool. So I had no manual, and because it was a brand new computer, right? So this is what it came with the computer, was a squiggle and big time. And I learned BASIC by listing the program and playing with it. And it was pretty clear that an 8K PET with a cassette tape was not going to keep track of 1 million items in a museum. So we looked at it originally, it's like, okay, we could do like 2 or 3 cassettes for each letter of the alphabet for the names of people and such, and that might work, but nah, it didn't work at all. So not possible, but I learned how to do BASIC by listing things. And then next year, finally, the manual was released. And so we get the manual. And if you've ever seen the manual before, you notice that the manual on the right-hand side is the rounded style PET, which you might recognize as the wooden PET. And so that's what they did for the pictures for that original manual. So I've been writing stuff in BASIC, and BASIC was great, super duper fast and fun until you do a lot of stuff in BASIC, and then guess what happens to BASIC in your main loop? It slows down, right? And so your Space Invaders, it plays kind of like Space Invaders, really slow at first, and then as things go away, it gets faster and faster and faster, which was great for that. But if you want to do an asteroid, you can't do that, because as soon as you break a rock and start adding more stuff, it starts slowing down more and more. So the solution to that was my life-altering addition of this, which was the machine language monitor for the PET. And so this is how I learned to do fast coding, which was on machine language. Now, everybody should know the difference between machine language and assembly coding, because they're completely different. So machine language is hexadecimal coding. You got to know like A900 is load accumulator with 0, immediate. And so that's how you do your programming. There wasn't an assembler at the time. So when you do all this coding and you list it, well, if you look at the memory, because it's a memory dump, then you could save your programs, and that's how that worked. And you could, call syscall from BASIC into it. So it's 1979. I entered high school, and I was doing more game writing. And so the PET was being used by the museum at this point as a kiosk display. And so my dad would bring it home on the weekends, and I'd make a new kiosk update, and I'd write more game stuff for it, which was really important for me. So I had a lot of experience with electronics because every kid at this age was going to Radio Shack like it was a place that served crack, because we all went there all the time. And we got our free batteries every month with our free battery card and all these things that you remember from this. So I was building some electronics, all the different kits, Forest Mims and all these books that we had and such back in the day. And then I wanted to make a CB2 interface, which is the sound interface port for the PETs. And so if you've ever seen this before, this is a very common thing you see on all the different game programs back in the day. And so I made an interface for the PET, but we didn't have connectors we could get access to back in the day. So we were talking to my guys today about this. I remember soldering on the fingers on the back side as close to the circuit board as possible, and you got to do it really quick, otherwise you could have the solder flow onto the finger. It would ruin the finger if you ever want to plug in a device someday. So, but in modern times, we have some really good other things you can do, including this one. So this is the Stupid Pet Tricks, and Jim Happel here is the guy that right here that invented this whole thing, and I dropped it on him today that I was going to talk about this. So if you want to do something for the PET and have sound and joysticks, this is the way to go. Don't solder to the back of your connector on your computer. So in 1980, I was helping my junior high school set up all their Commodores. So they got a whole bunch of 4032s and the PET 4040 drives, or they weren't even 8050 drives at the time, I don't think. And so I helped them set up their whole entire thing. And I wanted a disk drive so bad because I had cassette tape and that was it. So just helping them up was like, oh, I could use a disk drive. I could plug it in. I could, format disks. I could load things off of it. And IEEE on a PET is very fast for loading compared to like 1541 and all this. So it's something I really, really wanted. I also set up the tractor printers, the 4022s. So remember, I'm in high school. I mean, this is the point. I'm a freshman, no, sophomore in high school, setting all this stuff for them. And so that was my big claim to fame for my junior high school. They brought me in to do that, which is fun. So 1981, I'm a junior, and this is probably the most revolutionary step in computing that I remember this particular time. You may remember this. This was the advertisement for the ZX81, and it was a kit or assembled. And I told my dad, this came out in October. I said, I have to have this for Christmas. I have to have this because it's electronics and I could build it. It was fun. I built it, and of course it's horrible because it's a ZX81, and the fast mode makes the screen blink and all these issues, but it was something that I really wanted to have part of my experience. And what's funny about this is that on the PETs, they had Panasonic tape decks that were built into the PET for the ones that had the cassette disc built in. I went and got a Panasonic cassette deck identical to what was in the PET so I could use it on the ZX81, just so I'd have a little bit of Commodore feel to it. So I had no experience with Z80 assembly at all, and so I couldn't do any kind of Z80 coding whatsoever, and that stunk because that BASIC was super duper slow, and the whole computer was slow. So 1982, my junior year, and I get this revolutionary color machine, which is awesome. And so I started writing games in color. And then I made my first character graphics generator program so I could write games with character graphics themselves. So I wrote a Defender clone with all character graphics, which was great. And then I had a really good friend of mine who was a programmer, but he went the dark side, and he went to the TRS-80, but he knew assembly code. So I thought, oh, cool. So I learned Z80 assembly from him so I could work on the ZX81 this way. His dad was also a professor at the technical college. So we both started our college coursework early in my junior year. So this is probably the most consequential year for me, was 1983. Apple IIs were in school. It sucked. And I got kicked out of English class several times for writing programs on notepaper. I got kicked into another class. I remember this. So we were reading Macbeth, and I have all these papers on my desk everywhere, right? And the guy comes over, the teacher, he's like, Mr. Drew, are we disturbing you? And I was like, no, not at all. Continue. I'm fine. You're like, you're gone. You're out. So I ended up going to a different English class. And so basically I finished coursework and I was going to go to the University of Hawaii to get a degree in engineering for electrical engineering and for computer science. And my aunt lived in Hawaii, married a Samoan. And so the next day after graduation, I moved to Hawaii to find this girl and this island and a degree. And sadly, none of that happened immediately because the girl was probably taken, and 3 days later, I ended up getting a job while I was there. So my uncle was like, "You need to find a job." And so my uncle, who was real Samoan, 7'2", 500 pound, can dehusk a coconut by himself and all this. He said, "You good job." And I said, "I got you a good job." And so my good job was here. This is the Dole Pineapple Cannery. So I was a depalletizer, and that was an interesting job. So every day we come into work, we wear these rubber suits, right? And you can draw straws for what they call the 64s. And those are the large cans. And what happens is that these are all magnetic pickup. And so when the operator goes too fast, it drops the whole entire row of cans that are 64s. And when they hit the ground, they explode like bombs, and you're just drenched with pineapple juice. So we didn't want to work the 64s ever. So I wanted to get out of that job because it was, a little bit of messy and it was a strange work hours and stuff. So I found an advertisement for Safeway and for a job, and they're looking for somebody with electronics experience, and they were going to install the very first barcode scanners for the grocery stores. So I ended up taking a job at Safeway, and you can see that they wanted somebody with some digital experience because that's a lot of circuitry in this thing. And so after 5 months of being there, I couldn't stand the weather. It rains constantly in Hawaii. I mean, it's nice, but nice place to visit. Don't want to live there. That is absolutely true. So I moved, and I went back to Portland, Oregon. So I came from Klamath Falls, Oregon, and coming back to Portland, Oregon. I arrived, and I was looking for a job again. And so I'm looking in the ads, and I see a very familiar face in the ads for jobs. And it's for Commodore. And so I go in to interview for this job, and it ends up being the technical support representative for Commodore for the state of Oregon schools, for supporting schools. And so Commodore was really big into schools. Obviously, every school they wanted him in. But my job was at Computron Business Systems, which was a computer store that Commodore had a part in. And so, ironically, I had checks from Commodore. I had checks from the local the company that owned it. So I did sales and help for the local company, and I did the school stuff for Commodore. And so my checks always came like 2 weeks later, and I couldn't figure out why it was so late coming from Commodore. Well, they told me, it's like, well, it's coming from the King of Prussia. I was like, well, why would the King of Prussia be writing checks for me? And so the King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, is where the accounts payable was for the employees. But I thought it was coming from a king. I was like, wow, I'm 18 years old. I have no idea, right? So the big problem with the school districts was that this was 1983, and this is late 83. And so the 64 is out for basically a year at that point. And it was hardly any software really for it. And trying to sell a 64 in place of a PET system was really difficult to do because all the printers and the disk drives were all IEEE, so you couldn't use those. They had to update everybody's stuff. And so it was a really hard sale. So I kind of struggled with that whole thing. So Computron was interesting because it was downtown Portland, and they had the service center for Commodore as well. And they also had a whole bunch of local talent, I should say, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, that they were able to buy things and resell it as like a mail order company. So I conned them into doing some ads in Computer's Gazette and things like this. And so they did a bunch of advertising back in the day. This is kind of hard to see, but they had AproSpan and all kinds of things for the VIC-20 and 64 things, and I kind of pushed that whole thing. So when I wasn't doing the school stuff, on my free time, I actually was in the Commodore Service Center. And I spent a lot of time replacing motherboards, basically. We're doing fixes at first, and then swaps later on for the sparkle bug problem that Commodore had with the original 80,000 first units. So I did that, and I didn't get paid for that, I don't think at all. I just did it because I wanted to learn how it all works. So during this time, I finally got a disk drive. I was like thrilled I got a disk drive. So I actually started writing disk copying software and working a little bit on hardware solutions for this. And then I became friends with two guys, Steve Byrne and Daryl Miller, and they were both older engineers for different companies. Steve was an engineer for Warren Winch Company, and then Daryl Miller actually worked for Approspan, and he's the guy who invented the expansions for the VIC-20, and he was working on a 64 version. And I'm not sure why he was in Portland because Approspan was located in California, but I know they worked kind of remote or something like this. And so I conned these guys into, I said, like, one day I said, look, you know what we should do? We should all do something together with this. So we decided to make a cartridge copier. And this is a cartridge copier. It's super duper rare. I actually found this at eBay because I didn't have one of my own. And this was a cartridge copier, and how it worked is there's two green and red LEDs, and it would tell you if the cartridge uses the XROM or the game line, which is what bank of memory the cartridge is in. And you set your dip switches based on that, and then you would actually copy the cartridge to a disk file or a tape file. And then to load it back, you see the larger slot, that's actually a VIC-20 expansion slot. You put a VIC-20 16K RAM cartridge into it, and then you load the cartridge back into the RAM, and then it plays exactly like an original cartridge. So there's no copy protection you have to remove, anything like that, like they used to do back in the day, where you look for like 8501, which is store to 1 to change the 0 page, flip the register to turn off the cartridge. All that stuff doesn't happen to redoing it at all. So I've got, this is another picture of it from a side view. It was made by Computron. They actually sponsored the whole thing. So it was a project they had done, which was pretty cool. So after all this was done, I decided that I didn't need to be doing stuff with Commodore and Computron anymore. We needed to work as a company together, and we made a company. So we made Final Source Software. That was the name of the company. And so we worked on a variety of products. We worked on what would have been the very first true flux copier. So back in 1983, to get a 1541 disk drive, it was almost impossible because Commodore's stock was so low, and they were constantly selling them. And they were selling for more than the computer was at one point. We were selling disk drives out of there from Commodore. We were selling disk drives for $700 a piece, more than 64 was. And so the flux copier we designed required 2 floppy drives, and 1 floppy drive was completely disabled. So if you're looking at the price of floppy drives back then, you could have $1,000 easily into 2 floppy drives, and all it does is copy disks. That's all. So it wasn't very useful. People didn't want to do it for that, so we abandoned that whole thing. And I made the first copy program called Gemini. And then in '84, the Pacific Northwest, which is Portland and northern Oregon, a little bit of southern Oregon, and Vancouver, Washington area, for whatever reason, all of the major players for the copy programs and utilities were there. We were all located within 25 miles of each other. And so it was interesting competition. So there was Megasoft, if you know that name, Utilities Limited, which was from Megasoft, Software Support International, which is the Bullseye and Maverick and all those things, Basement Boys Software, which is Mike Henry Software, Central Point Software, which is, Copy 2 and Copy 2 PC and Copy 264 and all that, Chip Level Designs, Nick Swift Copy, all those were in the same area. And I don't have any idea why that was the case, but we know like in Texas, there was Marty Franz and Joe Peter for SuperKit. And then there was Ithaca, New York, there was Ultrabyte, and there's a few others. And that was it. That was the whole entire, so we had an entire mecca in the particular area. So I created thousands of parameters over the next few years. In fact, I wrote more than 3,000 parameters for cracking software. And they were all distributed through Megasoft and Utilities Limited, and some private ads in different magazines and stuff as well. So ads were created by guessing what you could do, right? And so we would always sit around and go, okay, we've got 60 to 90 days before the ad drops. What can we create in 60 to 90 days? What kind of widget can we make? And that's how basically we came up with products, is that we had a 60 to 90 day window. And so like, okay, what kind of copier can we do? Well, it can copy this and this and this. Can we do that? No, not today we can, but I'll bet you we can in 90 days. So that's how all the ads were done. And so I ended up making a disk copier called Gemini 2, version 2.0. And then I would make Echo, which was the very first 8K RAM expansion for the disk drive. and it'd be later recalled SuperCard. So in 1985, I did a bunch of stuff, but this is probably the most well-known ad in all history back in the day. So this is a thing. To the left-hand side, you'll see Keymaster, which is a copy program I wrote, and then the left is below is the ROM, which is a Magnum load. But on the right-hand side is the Shadow. So if you've ever heard of the Shadow before, this is the Shadow Fiasco. And so Shadow was a board that Megasoft was working on, and it was made by a gentleman named Jack Cornelius. And there was a hacker pack, which was a display. So oops, there's my sets of keys for that. So there's a display here on the disk drive. So this whole thing was a scam. It literally was a scam. The guy was doing a scam. They asked me to build the mock-up. So what you see in this ad is something that I actually built. It was non-functional, but it was supposed to be functional. They said, "Oh, we're going to make this work." Like, okay. So it's non-functional, and the whole entire thing was non-functional. The Jack Cornelius was like a shyster. It didn't work. It never worked. And so that was a real problem. But this whole hacker pack thing was based on my disk drive. This is a drive that I have, and these guys have seen that I bring it to different events. And this actually was my holy grail for looking at copy protection, because I can map in the copy protection, the 0 page, and flip it out after the copy protection is loaded. And I could go look at the data later on, and I could see exactly what was going on. So there was no mystery to me about copy protection and such. So this is 1985. I received a C128 prototype, and I'll explain a little later, but it turns out this prototype is property of Commodore, not for sale. It was stolen from Dave Haney's desk and sent to me. And so that's how I got it. And so I was able to do C128 support for copiers because of the theft of this. And I'll talk to you about later about Dave talking about this. This is the inside of what it looks like from the prototype. And I have this, and I bring it to shows occasionally. So in 1986, because of the Shadow fiasco, Reggie Warren, who was the owner of Megasoft, was being hounded by everybody because he basically stole everybody's money. And the credit card companies were coming after him. Ended up filing for bankruptcy, moved Megasoft assets into Utilities Limited. And then they hired me to fix the Shadow. So this was the Shadow fix. Basically, I turned this expensive board that's supposed to do all these neat things into an 8K RAM board, and you could run my software for Echo and copy almost everything. So the hacker pack was never released. Reggie was kind of a scoundrel as well, and Jack was supposed to have gone to jail, and there's all kinds of different things. But Reggie was trying to get out, so we ended up selling 50% of Utilities Limited to a husband and wife that just retired from the forklift business and had no experience with computers, and which was great for him because then he could just basically ramble on, and they had no idea, they thought. So in 1987, Reggie sells out the remaining 50% to this husband and wife, and I end up getting 50% ownership, or 25% ownership of the company and a salary, which to me was amazing because, you know, I'm at 87 when I'm like 20, 22 years old, and I've actually got like a stable job now for the first time. Because all this stuff was pretty unstable before. So in 87, the Amiga was already out, and the 64 stuff was pretty much at a peak, really. And we were trying to decide if we were going to go into the Amiga market or do something else like a Nintendo cartridge backup system, which I really wanted to do. And so, being the dumb guy that I am, I reached out to Nintendo and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And no response. Then we get a response, certified letter. And it was a polite, "Don't do that, please." And so we got into the Amiga market. And so the very first Amiga thing I designed was SuperCard Amy, which is a hardware disk copier, which is this. And so 2 LEDs, one for read, one for write. And you could duplicate basically every Amiga disk with this piece of hardware and software. However, 1987, I'm new to the Amiga, and I read everything in assembly code anyway because of the 64, and basically everything has been assembly ever since then. I didn't know anything about the Amiga, so I wrote everything in assembly, low level. There's no Windows, no nothing. I basically took over the OS and did my entire bitmaps and key inputs, so it was complete, you know, low level program. No clue whatsoever. And so the next year, we're officially in the Amiga market for sure now because it was a good success for that product. But then I went ahead and did SuperCard Amy, external one with a switch, and this one actually used the OS to do Windows and things like this. So it was OS friendly, so it could multitask. The other one didn't multitask at all. But I was in a lawsuit with a company in the UK that stole my SuperCard Amy original, and so we had to sue them. And then after thousands of dollars later, in almost a year, we win. And what's delivered to me is a box of these things, and that's it. So it was just a waste of money. So then I also did an internal version of the SuperCard Amy. So this plugs inside the computer itself. You plug the disk drives into. Then we also did a Kickstart board, so you could have multiple ROMs for your Amiga. So we did quite a few things. I did a boot drive selector as well, which I've not talked about. So in 1989, we started winding down all of the 64 software because it was coming to an end for us, really, we thought. We thought the Amiga was going to really take over Nowhere 64. Of course, that didn't happen for a few more years. So we ended up going to the World of Commodore show at the Los Angeles Convention Center. And in 1989, I got married for all the wrong reasons. And then in 1990, I developed a disk copier called Sybil. And Sybil is this disk copier. And I loved acronyms, and I always made the actual name of what it was after creating the acronym. So Sybil is the simple yet borderline illegal luxury. And so it was a disk copier. And so this disk copier plugged into the parallel port and to the video port. And I got this idea at NAB, which is a broadcaster's thing. And so I became friends with NAB, and later on you'll see that I really became friends with a lot of those guys. I had an idea that a Genlock is something that synchronizes the video signal out of the Amiga's video port. And so I was talking to the guy about this, like, hey, how's that actually work? He goes, oh, no, we can synchronize the video. It's like, it's a master clock, blah, blah, blah. I said, what do you mean master clock? He goes, well, yeah, you can actually put an input signal into the video port, and you drop the line low for the Genlock port, and at that point, you have the clock for the Amiga. You can actually create whatever frequency you want, and that's how you do your synchronization of your video. So I went home after the NAB, which was in LA, and I made a quick test board, and it turns out that I can actually adjust the frequency of the Amiga in its entirety. And guess what's connected to everything in the Amiga? Everything. So Paula, which is a disk controller, if you change the frequency of the Amiga, it changes the frequency of Paula. So now suddenly I can read and write long tracks of data. So now I can copy Dragon's Lair and do all these different things. That was pretty cool. So as a byproduct of how this worked, I was able to read and write Mac disks, which have multiple densities. And so it was a pretty popular thing. And then there was a guy in Texas that had an AMAX, which was at the time was a black and white Mac emulator, Mac Plus emulator. He had actually said, hey, if you make these changes to AMAX, you can actually implement your Sybil into it. You could read and write Mac disks from inside of AMAX. So I made a patch for it, and I actually added support for it, which got the attention of ReadySoft. So ReadySoft, which is Dragon's Lair and all these different things, those are the people that actually made AMAX. So they wanted to make a deal with me to actually make a version of Sybil that they could use, and we could sell to them, and they would include with their emulation. And so we said, okay, cool, we'll do that. So we made 500 of the units. We had another 500 units in production. We contacted them. We said, here's the PO that we've got for it. And they decided they didn't want to do it. So we've got 500 of these units, which we can sell for, for copying and stuff like that. This was really popular, by the way, with the elite people, because for the very first time, you could actually take a copy-protected disk and create a disk image and send it via modem and then recreate it. So you could send it, you could send Dragon's Lair to your buddy if you wanted to. So it was real popular. So ReadySoft basically said, no, we're not going to do it. And that was a big blow to us. And so I said, you know what? That's fine, because we know what it costs to try to sue somebody overseas. We weren't that process. And so I silently vowed to get even. Okay. So because of the weather in Portland, which was rain and stuff, one day we were all sitting around, this husband and wife and myself, and we got a map of the U.S. out, and I swear this is the absolute truth. We threw a quarter up, and it landed on Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and we moved. All of us did. And so this is how I became moving to Arizona, was that fate. You know, we could have landed in New York or something. And so we move, and in 1991, I arrive in Arizona, April 4th, 100 degrees. And it was 104, by the way, when I left Havasu to come here. So I stayed in contact with the guy. His name is Joe Fenton, who did the AMAC support with us. And I told him what I wanted to do. I said, look, I want to make a full color multitasking Mac emulation because ReadySoft says it's physically impossible. And this would really be my vengeance for this whole thing. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I ended up going to the World of Commodore show in London that year in 91. And then I hired Joe Fenton to come. And it was the year of the implant. It was in 92. And this is the implant box for it. Again, another acronym. So implant stands for the Electronic Microprocessor Level Amiga Native Task. So that's where they came from. And so I set out to design a Mac 2 motherboard that plugged into the Amiga Zorro bus. And we actually used ProBoard on the Amiga to design it. And so, which is kind of a pain in the butt because this is all the circuit board you get to see. You have to slide the border around everywhere. So it's not like you can see like the entire board at once. You've got to scroll around it. So the whole entire board was designed this way. And so there was a prototype that was completed and ready for FCC verification. This is the actual prototype board I still have. And this is the front side. This is the back side. And you can see whoops, let's go back to here. There's a few bodge wires you can see. So the difference between FCC today and back then is a big difference. So back then you could have either FCC verification or certification. And the difference between the two is that certification, you were required to provide the schematic to the device that you're actually getting certified to the public. Verification, you didn't have to. And it was a slightly different set of circumstances for testing, a little more rigorous with the verification than the certification was. So we opted for the verification because I didn't want anybody to have the schematic to it. And so we made this prototype board. And then on the board here, I had this little saying in here. It says, why buy another computer when an Amiga can emulate all of them? You hold in your hand the power to emulate virtually any personal computer made today. Now, aren't you glad you bought an Amiga? And we thought so too. So that's on every single one of the boards. So August 22nd and the 24th, we were at FCC. And so the 22nd was a Friday. And we get there, and the way that FCC works is you have to plug something into every single port. And so on the Amiga 2000 we brought a Secocia printer, a large size Secocia printer, joysticks, and then a modem, and then we had the video port with the monitor. FCC required at the time that on the monitor, you have to display the letter H repeatedly. And so that was a requirement. We had no clue. So we just happened to have a box of discs with us that had Amiga Basic in it. So we wrote a program real quick, display H's on the screen. And then we're on outside. This is in Chandler, Arizona. And they've got this big, it looks like a big wire spool. And it's a rotating platform. And with all these antennas everywhere outside. And they turn it on. And immediately every alarm goes off in the place. And they will hit the breaker. It's like, what happened? You know, like, we can't test you because you're emitting severe spurious emissions on the VLS band for aircraft, and the airport's not far. I'm like, how's that possible? This is an Amiga with our board, right? And so I said, look, can we, because you failed immediately. We can't do any more testing for you at all. You got to take this back. You got to figure out what it is. Like, well, how are we going to figure out what it is? We don't know. So can you please do us this favor? And can we just turn on each item to figure out maybe what it is? Turns out to be a Secocia printer. Okay, so we pack up our stuff, go back to Lake Havasu, so it's a 4-hour drive. And on Monday, we show up again. Hey, we're back, right? And we passed. And it's Flom Labs. They're still in existence today. And as far as I know, we are the only people ever to come on a Friday and pass on a Monday, which was great for us. So the implant boards are made. We have Christmas import implant boards. And this is an actual production board that we had, and it was amazing. So I went to the World of Commodore show in Pasadena with the prototype board, and had it over top of my head, and I was like walking around with it, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, that's it, the board," because everyone knew about what's going on. So it was a lot of fun for that in Pasadena. And then in 1993, we went to the World of Commodore show in New York, and so which was great. And then I ended up talking at New York. I talked to Dave Haney, and we're just talking, and that's when we figured out that I was the person who got Dave Haney's 128, how that happened. And so I talked to Bill Hurd about this a few years ago, and he goes, "Oh yeah, it happened all the time. We had execs walk into our office and just steal things all the time and ship them wherever they wanted to go." And so it's not surprising. So Dave's like, "Oh, well, that's where it went." So he was happy to find out it went to at least a good home. So I talked with John DeLulu, who was head of marketing for Commodore, and they really wanted to do an implant 4000 bundle because the 4000 had just come out. And they wanted to do Mac emulation on the 4000. And they were afraid of Apple, of course, as a result of that. So I'm the dumb guy, right? Like, okay, well, heck, I took on Nintendo and lost, so let's go and take on Apple and see what happens. So I went to Apple's campus. So this is in 1993. The campus was just not quite finished yet, but I got a meeting with Scully and engineers and a room full of attorneys. And their biggest thing they wanted to know was how much tarnish of the Apple brand does this thing do? And so when I was all done, they were very upset with themselves. Because I showed that the Amiga itself, running the Mac emulation, could run math functions for rendering at 2.5 times faster than they could on the same exact frequency Amiga as a Mac. And I could flip back and forth to the Amiga screen, and look, it's Amiga's still running too, And so they were very surprised at the speed difference. They were very surprised about compatibility because I could run any Mac model ROM on the emulation. And of course, they can only run one Mac model ROM with whatever Mac they're running. So I could run 2FX software that's specific for it. I could run any of these different ones for it. And so I ended up going to the Apple campus, did all that stuff, and I am going to the World of Commodore show in Pasadena, this was nice. I also went to the World of Commodore show in Mississauga that year. And then in 1994, I released a couple new products. One was called the Amiga, which is an Amiga, again, an acronym, Amiga Mac Interface Adapter. You can plug a real Mac drive into it. And then I used custom logic we used back in the day. Instead of using PALs, which are a one-time burn, we used what's called a peel. And so ICT made these, and they were electrically erasable, and which was great because we would have spent $1 million doing the implant, doing all the different revisions we were doing to it. So I really liked the format, so we made a bunch of different things with custom logic chips, like the Amiga was done this way. And then 1994 was the death of Commodore, of course, as we all know, which stinks. And then 1995 was a great year because I got separated from my wife, and we also released Fusion, which was the next version of our Mac emulation. And so 95 was good for that. In 96, August 24th, 2 years to the day that implant FCC verification was done, Utilities Unlimited closed its doors. And all the copyrights for everything we've ever done for the entire years were assigned to me. And then I made a new company called Microcode Solutions, and I ended up working with Motorola on one of their projects, which was to try to make a new CPU to replace the Motorola CPUs used in the Mac. It was competition against IBM for the PowerPC. And we lost out because of cost mostly. And otherwise, the Macs would have never had PowerPC. They would have had the next generation of Motorola. So in 1997, I released Fusion and PCX. So Fusion is the Mac emulation. PCX is a PC emulation for the Amiga. So everything I wrote was 68,000 assembly. Courtesy of assembly I learned from the 64. I mean, everything I've done my entire life has basically been in assembly, all hand optimized. And give you an idea of how large some of these projects are, even though they're assembly. This is a screen grab from me doing assembly of PCX. I did this before I left. So there's 1,673,291 lines of assembly code. And so that's a lot of code to be doing over time. So that's the kind of size projects I was doing. By comparison, Fusion's about 249,000 lines of assembly code. But Fusion, I don't have to emulate a CPU like I do on PCX. So in 1998, Fusion PC was started. So I was doing a port to the PCs themselves. And so that was all x86 assembly code. Again, assembly from my time with 64s and stuff. And we actually crashed downloads.com. We did a demo version of it, and they crashed them on the first day. We had 1 million downloads in the first day and a half of downloads, which is great. And so this is a Fusion PC. This basically runs on a regular PC system. And I updated Fusion at that point also for the Amiga. And then 1999, I sold the rights to Fusion for the Amiga to Blittersoft, the sales rights, not the copyrights at all. And then that year, I'm going to Macworld to show Fusion PC, because then in Japan, everything is like small. Everybody loves these little tiny laptops like the Toshiba Libretto and all that stuff. So they could run Mac software at full speed for the first time ever in something small. So it was hugely popular with people. And I got sponsored by a company called Open Technologies, which was my distributor there. You can see this is Fusion PC banner that they had in our booth. And then this is how serious these people take this, right? So they wrote a book on the software, how to use the whole thing. And then we had parties. And so I ended up having to sign autographs with all these people, which was a lot of fun. So this is my, my day job kind of, which really was my day job, but I had hobbies as well. And so my hobby was racing cars and motorcycles, but I was racing cars for SCCA. And so I built a car for racing. And so this is my race car that I built. It was a street legal Corvette. And I ended up going to one final race at the end of the season, and I got a full ride scholarship. Basically, I got a full ride car that I could go race in. So I was going to go switch from doing computing to be a race car driver. That's what I was going to do. And then so crazy. So I ended up getting divorced finally after 4 years of being separated. And then I met the love of my life, believe it or not. She was moving from Phoenix to Lake Havasu. I was moving from Havasu to Phoenix. And so I ended up staying because of her. She's a great girl. And so 2000, 2005, as we know, in 2000, the Y2K was a flop. It didn't happen the way they expected it. I went back to Macworld again. And then I sold Fusion PC to my competitor. And then I started looking into doing stuff with microcontrollers. And so I worked with Microchip and speech chips you might be familiar with. This is actually the same speech chip that's in the in television and a lot of different cartridges for 64. And so I ended up going to a friend's house, playing around, and he had a paintball gun. And so I decided to pick it up and shoot it. And I thought, well, that's, pretty accurate. So I went out with him and play paintball. And the same guy kept shooting me over and over again. And I'm like, how do you know, to shoot me? He goes, well, when you're playing, when you run out of paint, your hopper keeps running, right? And so I'm like, oh, well, we're going to fix that right now. So I went home and I built a prototype board of a unit that turns off the hopper motor after 2 seconds of no paint going through. And so people loved it. And so I did different stages of this, and it became a commercial product. And so for the next 5 years of my life, I spent traveling the world playing paintball professionally and developing electronics for all the different guns. So if you put a little bit of AI into this, you could actually make it drop faster than a standard just free fall from gravity. And so we had AI back in the day. So I ended up making a company called Wicked Air Sports, and that became my actual day job. And so this is me, picture me at the Toronto Sky Dome, and I played all over the world, literally. So it was an indoor tournament, but I played outside as well, and ESPN broadcast tournaments. So this is kind of what I did. Now again, all this stuff, microcontroller, written in assembly, everything goes back to my original 64 doing stuff in assembly, or my PET doing assembly. So because I do everything in assembly, it's super duper optimized. I try to get every last bit of performance out of this thing. So I'm going to show you a promo video that I shot with the new gun. I think hope there's enough volume for this if it works. And so this is a promo I did for
new equalizer board from Wicked Air Sports at over 25 balls a second. It rocks.
Finger stretches.
Do start slow and then go fast, Jim.
Start slow, go fast.
Just rip it.
Just rip it.
Force of nature, baby. Okay, so that's 180 rounds. So, and that's me pulling the trigger legitimately. So basically, with it's a long trigger, you can learn to walk your trigger like this. And so this is how you play. And actually, was a back player. I could shoot 2,000 rounds of paint in a game pretty easily, which is like 11 pods or 12 pods. And so I could actually do this and reaching for pods and this, and I'm calling out, and I'm still doing this. And so again, that's, it's one of those things that it's assembly code, and it's all, pneumatics and your ice, and it's all sequencing basically. So let's see, my bunker one, I retired for paintball. So I retired at 40 because I got tired of being shot by my own stuff, basically. So I have got neat videos. I played at all the different world of the World Cup events that we've got for paintball. They're really our World Cup events. ESPN broadcast. They were actually a professional sport, and so there's videos. My wife was there, and I got knocked unconscious from a paintball gun because they really do have severe impact. And so the guy bunkered me in the snake, and then the guy jumps up and bunkers the ref as well and gets ejected for it. But so I got that on video, like all kinds of cool videos. So I kind of retired out of that because of that. So I made a new company called Extreme Power Systems. And the reason why I had done that is I played with RC airplanes and cars and stuff all my whole life, along with all the stuff I was doing. And I wanted to get into that, into RC stuff and play. And so I made a real-time telemetry system for aircraft. It did require lots of testing. And so that's basically what I did in 2006. In 2007, I ended up making the world's first full-range 2.4 gigahertz system for RC airplanes. And so I ended up doing what's called an Extreme Link system. And this is plug-in modules for all the old radios. So if you have an old transmitter, you can plug a module in, use a receiver, and now it's on 2.4 gigahertz. And I'm a serious jet junkie. Okay, this is my thing is jets. And so the very first time 2.4 was flown in a jet was at a national meet. And a friend of mine was a pilot. I said, go fly your jet with my stuff in it. And he's like, okay. And he got Top Gun for the event. It was great. It was great for publicity for my team. And then after this event happened, I got my turbine waiver because under US law, you're required to have a turbine waiver to fly a turbine-powered aircraft. And so I got my turbine waiver. And then in 2008, I transitioned basically into the UAV industry. And so I ended up having to learn SolidWorks because a lot of things that we were doing required enclosures for cases. And so these are the cases that were designed by me for SolidWorks for the plug-in modules we used. And so if you look at these are SLS prototypes that were done in 2008. This is 4 years before we had the first Ultimaker 3D printer. So these were done with SLS process. And then I got married, the love of my life. And so yesterday was our anniversary. And I'm here. And she's very understanding, so that's cool with it. So I got into the UAV industry really big, and by big, I mean I built some pretty big mock-ups of stuff that we were testing sensor arrays and stuff with. They're big jets. And so I made a thing called a Dynamax Pro. And so this is a electric ducted fan system I designed, and that's a 20 horsepower motor the size of your fist. And so I can show you some things, but I can't show you everything I've done because it's all classified stuff. But there's a cool video I'll show you of a drone that we built. We're doing testing. So that's 52 pounds of thrust on a 40-pound airplane. And so this is I can't tell you what the top speed of this thing is, but it's pretty fast. And then so I set up a category in Guinness World Book of Records for the fastest electric jets. So these are electric powered for everything. And so then I did this jet here, which isn't very big. It's only 48-inch wingspan with the same kind of fan system. And then I did this at an event.
Jim's probably going to push this a little harder. That was 223.9 miles per hour.
Yep.
So 223.9 miles an hour. And so that was a bad pass. I did 240 in that plane after that. So interesting note that there's no speed limit for electric, but turbine-powered aircraft are limited to 200 miles an hour. So 2011 was an interesting year for me because it was the year I got back into doing Commodore stuff in general. So what happened is I got an email from a guy who was super duper angry at me for not including the disc that he was supposed to get with his board that he bought on eBay. Like, I don't sell anything on eBay. What are you talking about? Well, it turns out somebody from the UK was actually knocking off all my old stuff and selling it on eBay. So I had to get an attorney and send him a nasty gram. And then basically this was one of the boards, Supercard Plus. And then so I was kind of looking at the retro community and going, holy crap, what happened? I mean, it's all still popular, right? So then I got a call from a friend of mine named Mike Cameron. You might know his brother, James Cameron, who is the producer and director of Terminator and all these things. So Mike actually has a house in Lake Havasu where I live. It's a vacation home. And I met him at the flying field, and he always said, yeah, we should do something together someday. And so he called me and said, hey, we're going to do Jim's Mariana Trench dive, and you're going to build all the flight control system for it. So so the big dilemma that we had when we got on site in Guam is that we built this ROV, and it has to be able to release Jim from the surface, or from the floor of the ocean, if there's an emergency, right? You can't have the ROV hold them on the ground. And so that was the problem, is that this optic fiber cable that Mike had designed, they had the tension wrong on it, and it would actually hold the sub. So we had to actually go to Home Depot. Whoops, I'll put it back here. And we had to buy this equipment from Home Depot, and we had to basically MacGyver this whole thing. So we had spare optic fiber cable, and we ended up using monofilament to be the proper tension, to be a 50-pound pull instead of being 250-pound pull, which would have held Jim on the bottom and killed him if the sub had been, or the ROV had been out. And so we ended up using a technique that I learned from the Commodore 64, believe it or not. If you take shrink tubing and you split it, you can wrap it around a wire, and you can shrink it with a soldering iron. So we sat on the floor in the hotel room for 2 straight days, and every 8 inches for 150 feet, we wrapped monofilament line around with the shrink tubing, and we were able to shrink it. And that's how we built the entire tether for the ROV, doing that. So that was an interesting thing. So that was the first year. In 2012, I did this, and Jim did a successful dive, which was good. So he didn't die, which was important for us. And so then I released Supercard Pro, which is a flux copier. And so I was officially back into the market for computing, retro computing. And then the first Ultimaker printer came out, which I got. And then in 2013, there's my Ultimaker that I got. 2013, I was doing a lot more UAV stuff, and all that stuff was this. So I can't talk about that. In 2014, I made a brand new product called the Y modem, which plugs into the user port, gives you modem connection emulation, which was great. And then 2015, I was doing a lot more of this stuff. So 2016, I didn't want to leave out my Amiga friends. So in this year, I did the Y modem 232, which is a RS-232 version of the modem. And then in 2017 and 2018, it's a lot more of this stuff. And so I'm still working on Commodore stuff during this time, but I'm doing a lot of this stuff. So 2019 rolls around, and I noticed something rather interesting. There was a massive part shortage going on. And so then I thought, well, I'm a dummy, so let's do something fun, and we'll do the keycap campaign on Indiegogo to make keycaps for 64. And then that was awesome, except for this happened, COVID. The world stops. The factory that was going to do my keycaps was repurposed by the Chinese government to make PPE, and it took a very long time to finally find a company that could do the keycaps. And so 2023, keycaps got released. And then I made a Y modem 232 Pro, which had a really cool display. And so we're at the important time. So 2024, because I'm a dummy, I decided to do a keyboard now, and having experience with this, so I did the on Indiegogo, and we have what's called the Bling Board 64. And it's the same kind of dilemma with keycaps. But the most important part of 2024 was this. So when I did the keycap campaign, I immediately got a nasty gram from Commodore that we're going to sue you for using our iconic shape and all that. And like, well, you know, you don't have a design patent on this. If you had been expired eons ago. You can't copyright a font face, so you guys can just, you know, kiss off. And so they didn't do anything with me at all. But it stuck in the back of my head. So kind of like the thing with ReadySoft, it makes me angry, right? And so I've been following this for a long time. This is Commodore's trademark for the chicken lips, okay? It was abandoned because of Commodore's, basically, you need what's called a statement of use. If you do not use a trademark in the US, it gets removed from you. And so I was waiting. They did 5 extensions over 2.5-year period. And after 5 extensions, USPTO will abandon your trademark. And so same thing happened. So when that happened, I immediately filed for the trademark for the Chicken Lips logo. Okay. And so that was in process. And then I also was waiting because I knew this was going to happen as well. And guess what? That one got abandoned too. And so I filed for that one as well. So I owned the pending trademarks for Commodore in the United States. So my full circle moment was when I was contacted by Parafractic about getting keyboards made for the new 64. And we were having this conversation about all the different trademarks and stuff like that. And he's scrolling through his screen on our call. And I said, hey, stop. He said, what? I said, you see number 4 there? And he said, yeah. I said, that's me. And he had no clue. So I can't say what's happened as far as how it all went down, but in my NDA, but I can tell you right now that I am a worldwide non-exclusive usage partner of Commodore branding. So I can put the Commodore logo on anything I want to at this point. And Commodore proper has the US trademarks back to them. So that's basically what's happened with them. So as a result of that, I became the exclusive keyboard provider for Commodore, and this is the new clear keyboard that's being done. I've got it at the booth and stuff. People have seen it all weekend, and with clear keycaps for testing. So it's a beautiful product when it's all done. I can't speak to what's going on with Commodore, so if you have any questions about what's going on with Commodore, I can't tell you because I have an NDA for stuff still. But I can tell you that I'm the exclusive provider of the keyboards. They're coming. The new machines are great. Gideon Schweitzer is amazing to work with. He's my buddy now, and we've been through a war together, and it's been a lot of fun. So that's my life in a nutshell. So full circle, I started with Commodore, and I'm back with Commodore whether I like it or not. So that's it. So if you guys got any questions about anything, we've got maybe a minute or two, and that's about it, right? Oh, thanks.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anyone has one, please line up here.
Nobody asked me anything. We can all get out of here quick.
Quick question.
Uh-oh.
Okay, was there ever something you couldn't copy?
Well, yeah, so...
And I'm not talking about from a legal perspective, but from a fair use self-backup perspective. Was there any mechanism that stopped you?
There's a program called 21-second backup. And so one of the things that was like an unwritten rule for all of us that made copy programs, and there was a lot of us in the Pacific Northwest, and we all went to the same user group meetings and stuff. And, you know, we like, we snarl at each other and things like that. We weren't even very cordial, but there was an unwritten rule that you didn't copy your competitor's program. You know, you didn't crack it, because the last thing you want to do is walk into a user group meeting and every single screen's got your competitor's product on their screen because it's free now. So we didn't do that. So I didn't even know this was an issue until I did the Supercard Pro board. And so the 21-second backup uses the most unique protection I've ever seen in my life. And it only works on 1541 disk drives. It's a byproduct of how that drive works. Basically, Charles LeBorn, who did this in Canada, he was able to write data as the head was stepping between tracks. And so the 1541 mechanics are true mechanics that are separate, like a servo motor. They're not like a PC drive where there's an actual controller that steps it and you can't do anything during the step process. So he wrote between tracks 10, 10 and a half, 11, 11 and a half, back to 10, kind of like this. And if you look on the analyzer on Supercar Pro, I can actually see what's happening. And so if you don't have the ability to read and write in this particular pattern, you can't copy it. So on a regular PC floppy drive, it's impossible. It's impossible on a 1571 mechanics, on a 1541-2 mechanics. Only the 1541 mechanics will actually make that work. And so I actually made a copy program in modern times to be able to copy it. So that was the only one I couldn't copy back in the day. But I didn't know we couldn't copy it because the fact that we didn't do that at all, and no one really cared. So, but other than that, no, I could copy everything pretty much other than laser protection too. So they had some people that actually poke a hole in the disc, with either laser or a punch, which you can't do anything about that kind of stuff. So that's just physical hardware. So that's it. That's a great answer. Yeah. All right, guys, thank you very much. I appreciate it.